Charleston woke slowly that morning, bathed in a kind of golden spring light that made even the cobblestones seem softer. In a quiet brick townhouse on the edge of the historic district, Nora Carter stood by the kitchen window with a mug of coffee cooling in her hands. The azaleas in the small front garden were in full bloom, but she barely noticed them. The silence inside the house had grown too familiar. Nearly 20 years of marriage had passed between her and Thomas. Years stitched together with laughter, routine, and unspoken regrets. Yet the air still felt heavy with everything they had lost. There had been a time, long ago, when they believed a family would come easily. In their late 20s, barely steady in their jobs, they had decided that a child would have to wait. They had plans, careers to build, debts to pay, a life to establish. So when Nora found herself pregnant, fear outweighed joy. She and Thomas agreed they weren't ready, and with his quiet support, she ended the pregnancy. She told herself it was the sensible thing to do. She told herself there would be another chance. But there wasn't. Months later, a doctor's voice turned their future upside down. Complications had left Nora unable to carry a child. The news hollowed her out. What had once been a practical decision became a wound that refused to close. The guilt festered, turning inward, then outward. She fell into waves of depression that swallowed weeks at a time. More than once, she packed a suitcase and filed for divorce, insisting that Thomas, kind, patient Thomas, deserved the chance to be a father. He never took it. Every time, he tore up the papers, telling her that love wasn't contingent on children. It's you I want, Nora. You, not some version of a life we don't have. His calm steadiness frustrated her almost as much as it comforted her. She accused him of settling, of pitying her. He never raised his voice. He just stayed. Only once did he leave. It was after the first divorce filing, when her anger was raw and his patience finally cracked. He packed a bag, said he couldn't stay where he wasn't wanted, and disappeared for 2 weeks. Those 14 days stretched into an eternity. Nora barely functioned, haunted by the possibility that she had pushed him away for good. Then, one gray morning he returned, exhausted, hollow-eyed, and more certain than ever that he couldn't live without her. They rebuilt what they could. Life settled into something steady again, but the scars beneath the surface remained. And over the years, something else crept into Nora, a bitterness she never meant to grow. It slipped into her words, her tone, the way she dismissed Thomas's gestures. She mocked his clumsy attempts at romance. She rolled her eyes when he brought home flowers. She called him careless for not reading her mind, cold when he didn't mirror her moods. Each jab landed harder than she realized. Thomas never stopped loving her, or saying so. But even his patience had limits. Lately, he begun traveling more for work, long stretches away on projects across the state, always with a text before he left, always with a call when he landed. Nora told herself it was normal. He was a structural engineer. Projects demanded travel. Nothing about his absences seemed unusual. Yet something about the quiet after he left, the long evenings spent alone in their Charleston home, unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. It was as if the silence itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to notice how far they had drifted. She didn't. Not yet. To her, everything was the same as it had always been. He was at work. She was at home. They were fine. And so she sipped her cooling coffee and turned her gaze to the blooming azaleas, unaware that the life she had clung to so tightly was about to change, not with a sudden explosion, but with a quiet shift she would never see coming. The cafe on King Street was buzzing with the usual afternoon crowd. Students bent over laptops, couples sharing pastries, the clatter of cups and soft hum of conversation blending into a familiar Charleston soundtrack. Nora stirred the foam on her cappuccino without really tasting it. Across the table, Sandra Hayes watched her with the kind of expression Nora had learned to dread, that steady, assessing look her best friend wore whenever she was about to say something Nora didn't want to hear. "At least the weather's nice," Sandra began lightly, breaking the silence. Perfect day to sit outside. Though I suppose you're too busy waiting for Thomas to call from wherever he is this time. Nora gave a small, dismissive laugh. Columbia. They're inspecting a new site. It's just work. Sandra tilted her head. You ever wonder if it's always just work? The question slipped into the space between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples through Nora's chest. She forced a smile. What are you trying to say? I'm just asking, Sandra replied, her tone deceptively casual. He's gone a lot lately. Longer trips. More often. Doesn't that make you curious? Nora let out a short, incredulous laugh. Curious? About what? Thomas isn't the kind of man who… Maybe not, Sandra interrupted gently, but people change. Circumstances change. And you, she paused, weighing her words. You haven't made it easy for him, Nora. The word stung more than Nora expected. Excuse me. Sandra set her coffee down and leaned forward. I've watched you two for 20 years. And I love you both, which is why I'm saying this. You treat him like a piece of furniture you assume will always be there. Like he doesn't have feelings that bruise. Nora opened her mouth to argue, but Sandra didn't stop. Remember your birthday 2 years ago? He brought you chrysanthemums because you'd once said you loved them. And what did you say? Of all the flowers I hate, you picked the ones I hate the most. I was joking, Nora muttered. Were you? Sandra asked quietly. Because I saw his face. He tried to hide it, but he was crushed. And that's just one example. What about the jobs you've quit because you were bored? Or the way you snap at him when dinner's late? Or act like he's a disappointment for not being able to read your mind? Nora stared into her cup, her pulse beginning to rise. And then, Sandra continued, you call him selfish because you don't have a child, something that isn't his fault alone. It's like you're punishing him for something neither of you could control. That's not fair, Nora said, her voice sharper than she intended. It's the truth, Sandra said, not backing down. And if you keep treating him like this, one day he's going to stop trying. One day he's not going to come back from one of those business trips. And when that happens, you'll look around and realize you pushed away the one person who never stopped choosing you. The cafe noise seemed to fade beneath the weight of her words. Nora gripped the edge of the table, her chest tight with a mix of anger and something deeper, something she didn't want to name. Why are you even saying this? She asked finally, her voice trembling. Aren't you supposed to be on my side? I am on your side, Sandra said softly. That's why I'm telling you the truth. Because if someone doesn't, you're going to lose him, and you won't even see it coming. Nora pushed her chair back, the legs scraping sharply against the tile. I don't have to listen to this. Nora, but she was already standing, pulling on her coat and walking toward the door. The spring sunlight outside felt too bright, the air too heavy. She walked without direction, trying to shake off the conversation, but Sandra's words clung to her like burrs. You treat him like he doesn't have feelings that bruise. One day, he's not going to come back. The phrases repeated in her head, each one a blow to the wall she'd built around herself. For the first time in years, an unfamiliar thought crept in, fragile and terrifying. What if Sandra's right? What if one day he really doesn't come back? The question followed her all the way home, settling into the quiet of the house like an unwelcome guest. And no matter how many times she told herself Sandra was exaggerating, Nora couldn't silence the small, uneasy voice whispering beneath her anger, the one that asked whether the cracks in her marriage were deeper than she dared admit. The house felt too quiet when Nora returned from the cafe, the silence pressing harder than usual against the walls. She dropped her bag on the entryway bench and stood there for a moment, replaying every word Sandra had said. It was easier to be angry than to admit the sting of truth, but the anger was already ebbing, replaced by a creeping unease she couldn't name. She poured herself a glass of water, still hearing Sandra's voice. One day, he's not going to come back. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A new message from Thomas. "I'll be home today." Just 4 words. And yet, something inside her shifted. Normally, she would have shrugged, maybe reheated leftovers, and waited for the sound of his keys in the door. But today felt different. Maybe it was Sandra's words, or maybe it was the strange ache of guilt that had been building all afternoon. Whatever the reason, Nora found herself moving before she had time to think. She pulled a cookbook from the shelf, the one she hadn't opened in years, and began planning a real meal. Braised short ribs, mashed potatoes, the apple pie he loved. She set the table with the good china, the one reserved for holidays and anniversaries. By the time the kitchen was filled with the smell of simmering broth, the knot in her chest had tightened into something else entirely, nervous anticipation. And then she did something she had never done in nearly 20 years of marriage. She decided to meet Thomas at the station. It felt ridiculous, standing in front of the mirror adjusting her hair like she was going on a first date. But she couldn't help it. There was a restless energy running through her veins, a mixture of excitement and dread. As she locked the front door and stepped into the golden glow of the late afternoon, she told herself it was just a small gesture, nothing more. Still, her heart thudded against her ribs the whole drive downtown. Charleston's Amtrak station was busy but not chaotic, filled with the ordinary rhythms of travel. Luggage wheels rattling over tile, conductors calling out destinations, the scent of roasted coffee from a kiosk near the entrance. Nora checked the arrivals board. Thomas's train would be in 30 minutes. She found an empty bench on the platform and sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It had been years since she'd felt this unsettled. She tried to steady her breathing, telling herself this was silly. He was coming home, just like always. They'd eat dinner, talk about his trip, maybe even laugh. Nothing was different, and yet everything felt different. "Are you waiting for someone?" The voice was small and bright. Nora turned to see a little girl, maybe 10, maybe younger, standing beside the bench with a balloon in one hand and a woman, probably her mother, calling from a few feet away. The girl smiled at her, unabashed and curious. "You look nervous," she said simply, tilting her head. "But don't be. If you accept the surprise that's coming, it might make you happy for the rest of your life." Nora blinked. "What?" The girl just grinned, as if she'd said the most obvious thing in the world. "I think surprises are good," she added, then waved and darted back toward her mother. For a long moment, Nora sat frozen. It was just a child's passing remark, random, meaningless. And yet the words burrowed into her thoughts, repeating over and over. "If you accept the surprise that's coming." The loudspeaker crackled overhead, announcing that the train from Columbia was approaching the platform. Nora's pulse quickened. She stood, smoothing the front of her coat, suddenly unsure of what to do with her hands. It was ridiculous, she told herself again. Just a girl's comment. Just Thomas coming home. Just another ordinary evening. And yet her heart wouldn't slow down. Something deep in her bones hummed with warning, as if the world had shifted a fraction of an inch while she wasn't looking. She stared down the track as the train rolled closer, its headlights cutting through the amber light of the setting sun, and felt the strange certainty that whatever waited for her on that platform was going to change everything. The platform was already crowded when the train's whistle echoed through the warm Charleston evening. Nora shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clutching the strap of her purse a little too tightly as the engine's roar grew louder. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and rose, and the breeze off the tracks carried the metallic scent of steel and oil. Around her, people craned their necks, waved signs, called out greetings. It was an ordinary scene, ordinary in every way but the way Nora's chest felt like it was being squeezed. She scanned the rows of windows as the train slowed, searching for the familiar shape of Thomas's frame. He'll step off smiling, kiss me, tell me about his trip, she told herself. It'll be fine. Everything is fine. The doors hissed open with a hydraulic sigh, and passengers began to spill out. some moving quickly toward waiting arms, others dragging suitcases behind them. Nora rose onto her toes, heart hammering. Then, through the shifting crowd, she saw him. Thomas. Even from a distance, she would have known him anywhere. The easy, steady gait, the way he scanned the platform with that same searching look he'd always worn when trying to find her in a crowd. But before she could lift her hand to wave, her breath caught in her throat. He wasn't alone. A young girl walked beside him, barely 17 if that, and Thomas was guiding her gently by the elbow as she stepped down from the train. She stumbled slightly on the last step, and he caught her, steadying her with the kind of instinctive care Nora had once known so well. And then, without hesitation, he pulled the girl into a brief hug. Nora's lungs forgot how to work. No, this isn't what it looks like. But the thought was weak, drowned out by the surge of nausea that swept through her. She's just a kid. She's younger than the interns at his firm. She's younger than God, Nora whispered to herself, pressing a hand against her chest. She's younger than our niece. The world around her blurred. Announcements crackled over the speakers. Porters called for luggage, but all of it felt distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. The girl laughed at something Thomas said, a bright, youthful sound that sliced through Nora's days. Then Thomas turned, and his eyes found her. For a second, everything stopped. The noise, the movement, the rush of the evening crowd, all of it fell away. It was just the two of them, locked in a moment that felt both achingly familiar and utterly foreign. Thomas's face broke into a smile. He lifted his hand and waved, calling her name above the din. The girl beside him followed his gaze, her expression shifting from curiosity to apprehension. Her fingers twisted nervously in the strap of her backpack as if she wasn't sure what to do next. Nora's feet refused to move. Her body felt rooted to the platform, her thoughts a chaotic storm. What is happening? Who is she? Why didn't he tell me? Thomas didn't hesitate. He guided the girl through the crowd and stopped just a few feet from where Nora stood frozen. Without a word, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. I missed you so much, he murmured against her hair. The words slammed into her, shattering the story she'd been spinning in her head. No man in the middle of an affair would hold his wife so openly, so tenderly, in front of the person he was betraying her with. No man hiding a secret like that would look this relieved just to see her face. Slowly, stiffly, Nora's arms came up around him. The scent of his cologne, cedar, and citrus hit her like a memory of safer times. She wanted to pull away, to demand answers, but her voice was gone. Thomas stepped back, still holding her hands. Nora, he said softly, this is Lily. The girl offered a small, awkward smile and a timid wave. Up close, she looked even younger, all long limbs and nervous energy, with eyes that darted between Nora and Thomas as if waiting for permission to breathe. Thomas's gaze held hers, steady and serious. I have a lot to tell you, he said. More than I can explain here. But can we talk about it at home? Nora swallowed hard, her pulse thundering in her ears. There were 1,000 questions clawing at her throat, but none of them made it past her lips. All she could do was nod. Okay, she whispered. Thomas's shoulders eased, and for the first time since stepping onto the platform, he looked like he could breathe again. He gestured toward the exit, placing a reassuring hand on Lily's shoulder as they began walking together. Nora followed beside them, her mind still spinning, the child's words from earlier echoing in her head like a drumbeat. If you accept the surprise that's coming, it might make you happy for the rest of your life. Right now, that surprise felt more like a detonation. And with every step toward the parking lot, Nora knew nothing about this evening was going to be ordinary. The taxi ride back to the house unfolded in thick, suffocating silence. Streetlights flickered past the windows in a rhythmic blur, casting fleeting bands of gold across their faces. Nora stared out at the city she'd known all her life. But tonight, even the familiar streets of Charleston felt foreign, distant, unreal. Thomas sat beside her, his hands folded tightly in his lap, gaze fixed on the darkened world outside. Across from them, Lily rested her backpack on her knees, eyes lowered, the faint hum of the tires the only sound between them. No one spoke. Nora tried to steady her breath, but her heart was still racing from the shock at the station. She stole a glance at the girl sitting across from her. There was something about Lily's face, the shape of her chin, the curve of her cheekbones, that stirred a strange familiarity Nora couldn't quite name. And those eyes, soft, deep brown, the same way Thomas's eyes looked when he was trying to read her mood before speaking. She looked away quickly, pulse tightening. It was ridiculous to speculate, ridiculous to draw lines between features and names. And yet, the thought had already taken root, quietly and stubbornly. Who is she? By the time the taxi turned onto their street, the tension in the car felt almost tangible. The porch light glowed softly in the twilight as Thomas paid the driver, and the three of them stepped out into the cool night air. Nora unlocked the door without a word. Inside, the house was warm and smelled faintly of the dinner she'd prepared earlier. The table was still set with the good china, the candles waiting to be lit. For a moment, Nora was struck by the absurdity of it all. The small, hopeful gesture she'd made just hours ago now felt like part of a different life. "Your home is beautiful," Lily said quietly as they stepped inside, her voice hesitant, almost apologetic. "Thank you," Nora replied, her own voice sounding strange to her ears. They stood in the hallway for a beat too long, three people unsure of their next move. Then Lily cleared her throat and offered, "May I help with dinner?" Nora blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, you don't have to." "I'd like to," Lily said a little firmer this time. Thomas gave Nora a small, tentative nod, the kind that said, "Please, just let this be easy." So she nodded, too. "All right, come on then." In the kitchen, Nora moved on autopilot, checking the oven, stirring the sauce, arranging plates. Lily followed her lead, asking where to find serving spoons and napkins, carefully placing them on the table without being asked twice. She was polite, even graceful in her movements. But beneath that politeness was a nervous energy, like she was terrified of overstepping. At one point, Nora reached for a bowl and found Lily already holding it out to her. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, and that's when Lily spoke, softly, almost as if she were afraid the words would shatter something fragile between them. "Please don't be angry with my dad." Nora froze. "My dad?" Lily's voice trembled, just slightly as she went on. "He's so scared of losing you. You're everything to him. That's why he didn't tell you about me sooner. He didn't know how. He talks about you all the time. He loves you so much." The room tilted just a little. Nora set the bowl down before she dropped it, her hands suddenly unsteady. "Dad." The word reverberated in her head, impossible to ignore now. She looked at Lily, really looked. And suddenly the familiarity she'd brushed aside in the taxi wasn't subtle anymore. It was undeniable. The slope of the nose, the faint dimple that appeared when she offered a shy, hopeful smile. They were Thomas's features, not a coincidence. Not a trick of the light. Nora swallowed hard, 1,000 questions jostling for space in her mind. She wanted to ask them all. When did he find out? Why didn't he tell me? Why now? But the words wouldn't come. All she could do was stand there, staring at the girl who had just used the word dad without hesitation. Somewhere deep inside her, a single piece of a much larger puzzle shifted into place. And as the weight of what that meant settled over her, Nora felt the first flicker of something she hadn't let herself feel until now. Fear. Fear that the life she had always believed was hers, stable, predictable, unchanging, had already been altered in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Dinner should have felt ordinary, the clinking of silverware, the hum of conversation, the soft glow of candlelight on the table she had set so carefully that afternoon. But nothing about this night was ordinary. Nora sat at the head of the table, her fingers wrapped too tightly around the stem of her wine glass. Thomas sat across from her, his posture stiff and cautious, while Lily shifted uneasily in her seat, her fork barely touching the salad in front of her. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Nora broke it first. She raised her glass, her voice calm but laced with bitterness. "Well," she said, swirling the deep red liquid, "it's not every day your husband comes home with a child you didn't know existed." Thomas flinched, as if struck. Lily's head dipped lower. "Nora! No, really," she continued, still staring into her glass. "Most wives spend their afternoons cooking dinner, not preparing to meet a teenager their husband brought home without warning." Thomas drew in a long breath and exhaled slowly. "You're right," he said. "You're right to be angry. You have every right to feel blindsided. But please let me explain." Nora set her glass down with a soft thud and looked up at him. "Then explain." He stared at his hands for a moment before speaking, his voice quiet and uneven. "It was a long time ago. The first time you filed for divorce. Do you remember?" "How could I forget?" Nora murmured. I was broken," he said simply. "I didn't know how to fight for us anymore. I went back to my hometown, thinking maybe I needed space to breathe, to figure out what life even meant without you. One night, I drank too much. I ran into an old friend from high school, someone I'd once dated. We talked, we laughed, and I made a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake." Nora stared at him, expression unreadable. "You slept with her?" "Yes." The word hung heavy in the air. "And the next morning, I knew I couldn't stay there. I told her the truth, that I loved you, that I couldn't live without you. And then I left. I came home. I begged you to give us another chance, and somehow you did." Her breath came shallow and sharp. "And you never thought to mention this detail." "She never told me," he said, quickly leaning forward. "Not then. Not for years. I didn't know she was pregnant. I didn't know there was a child." The room fell silent again, except now it pulsed with something heavier, confusion, betrayal, disbelief. Nora's eyes shifted to Lily, who was now staring at her plate, cheeks flushed. 7 years ago, Thomas continued, she reached out. "She told me about Lily. She was sick, cancer. She said she didn't have much time left and thought I deserved to know." He swallowed hard, his voice cracking slightly. "I tried to be part of Lily's life, but she was living with her mother. I respected that. I sent support, I called when I could, but it wasn't the same. Then, 2 years ago, she died." Nora's chest tightened. "And Lily?" "She moved in with her aunt," Thomas said. "She finished school and now she's done. She's 17. She's bright and kind and deserves a chance to know her father." The word father twisted in Nora's gut. "So you decided to bring her here?" "Yes," he admitted. "Because I don't want any more secrets between us. Because you deserve the truth, and Lily deserves a family. I should have told you sooner. I was terrified you'd hate me or hate her or both. But I can't keep her at a distance anymore." He finally looked up at her, his eyes raw and pleading. "I love you, Nora. That has never changed. And I love her too. I know how impossible that sounds, but it's the truth. And I don't want to choose between you. I want all of us to try." Nora didn't speak. The room seemed to shrink around her as the weight of his words settled over everything. 17 years, a secret child, a life she'd never known running parallel to her own. It was too much to process, too much to feel all at once. Lily's small voice broke the silence. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to make things hard. I just wanted to know my dad." Nora looked at the girl, at the wide, fearful eyes and trembling hands, and then back at Thomas. There was no anger in his face now, only exhaustion and a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward from here. She turned back to her wine glass, staring into its deep red depths. Nothing in her life felt certain anymore, But one thing was painfully clear. The world she thought she knew had been rewritten, and there was no going back. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Nora sat in silence at the end of the table, her wine untouched, her fingers tracing slow, absent-minded circles on the stem of the glass. She could feel both pairs of eyes on her, Thomas's steady but anxious gaze and Lily's wide, terrified one, but she couldn't bring herself to meet either. The quiet hummed louder than words, pressing against her from all sides as thought after thought crashed through her mind. Thomas had betrayed her. There was no other word for it. Even if it had been just one night, even if it had happened years ago, even if he hadn't known about the pregnancy, the fact remained that he had broken something sacred between them. And for 17 years, a truth this enormous had existed just beyond the edges of her life. She had every right to rage, every right to scream, and yet anger was not the only thing she felt. Because woven into the betrayal was something far more complicated, the uncomfortable knowledge that she had not been blameless either. The words Sandra had hurled at her in the cafe echoed now with brutal clarity. You treat him like he doesn't have feelings that bruise. How many times had she lashed out at Thomas over the years? How many times had she twisted the knife of their shared grief just to see if he would bleed? He had made a mistake, yes, but she had made a habit of cruelty. She had spent years pushing him away, telling him he deserved someone else, someone who could give him the life she denied him. And in a moment of weakness, he had stumbled into someone else's arms. That choice had consequences, one of which was now sitting across from her, trembling and small, her fork untouched. Lily wasn't the enemy. She wasn't the cause. She was a consequence. And more importantly, she was a child who had lost her mother and was now terrified of losing the only parent she had left. Nora's eyes lifted slowly. Lily was staring down at her lap, her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles were white. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, as though she were bracing herself for whatever judgment was coming. And something inside Nora cracked. It wasn't fair to this girl. None of this was her fault. "Lily," Nora said softly, the sound of her own voice startling her. The girl's head shot up, her eyes wide and wet. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. Nora swallowed, feeling the tightness in her throat ease just a fraction. "I hope," she said, choosing each word with care, "that we can be good friends." For a heartbeat, Lily didn't seem to understand. She blinked at Nora as if the words were in a language she'd never heard before. Then the meaning landed and the dam broke. Tears spilled over as Lily covered her mouth with one trembling hand and let out a sob that was half relief, half disbelief. "Dad was right," she choked between breaths, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He said you were the best person in the world, that you'd understand, that you wouldn't hate me or send me away." Nora's heart twisted as the girl pushed back her chair and rushed around the table. She didn't think. She just moved, catching Lily as the girl threw her arms around her waist. The hug was desperate and clumsy, her small shoulders shaking with sobs. Nora hesitated only for a second before wrapping her own arms around her, holding her close. "Hey," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Hey now, don't cry." Lily clung tighter. "I just want to be part of your life. I don't want to ruin anything." "You're not ruining anything," Nora whispered. "We're going to figure this out. Together." The words felt strange on her tongue. Strange, but right. For the first time that night, the air around the table shifted. The sharp edge of anger dulled, replaced by something gentler. Compassion. Empathy. A fragile beginning of forgiveness. Across the table, Thomas had gone completely still. When Nora looked up, his eyes were bright with tears, his lips parted as though he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Nora gave him the smallest nod. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a promise that maybe someday it would come. Lily's sobs began to quiet as she pulled back just enough to look up at Nora's face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not hating me." "Nora," brushed a strand of hair from the girl's damp cheek and shook her head. "There's nothing to hate," she said. "You're just a kid who deserves love. And maybe, if you're willing, we can start there." The tears came back, softer this time, as Lily buried her face against Nora's shoulder. And as Nora held her, she felt the heaviness in her chest shift, just a little, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long, long time: hope. The night settled quietly over the Carter home, wrapping the old brick townhouse in a soft stillness. Dinner dishes were stacked in the sink, candles on the table had burned down to puddles of wax, and the house smelled faintly of apples and rosemary. In the living room, the three of them sat in a loose circle that felt fragile but real. Thomas on the edge of the couch, Nora in the armchair across from him, and Lily curled up on the rug, her back leaning against Nora's knees like a child who had finally exhaled after holding her breath too long. No one spoke for a while. It was a different kind of silence now, not the suffocating weight that had filled the taxi or the dinner table, but something gentler. Healing had not arrived, not yet, but the storm had passed, and what remained was the delicate quiet that follows a reckoning. Thomas watched the two of them with a look Nora had never seen before, a blend of awe, fear, and overwhelming gratitude. His eyes were rimmed with red, his shoulders hunched as though the confession had stripped him bare, and maybe it had. There was nothing left for him to hide now. When Lily finally drifted off, her breathing slow and even, Thomas moved closer and lowered himself onto the floor beside her. He glanced up at Nora, his expression searching. "I don't have words for this," he whispered. "For what?" she asked softly. "For you. For how strong you are. For not walking out the door tonight and never coming back." Nora exhaled a shaky breath and shook her head. "Strength has nothing to do with it. I'm still angry, Thomas. I probably will be for a while." "I know," he said, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness. But thank you for giving me the chance." He reached for her hand, tentative and trembling, and when she didn't pull away, his grip tightened just slightly. "Thank you," he said again, voice breaking now, "for showing kindness to her. She's been through so much, and I was terrified you'd hate her. Terrified I'd lose you both." Nora's gaze drifted down to Lily, asleep and peaceful, her cheek pressed against the hem of Nora's sweater. "She's just a girl," Nora murmured. "None of this is her fault. And she deserves a father." Thomas swallowed hard. "And you deserve a husband who never hurt you." "Maybe," Nora said. "But we don't always get perfect, do we?" He shook his head. "No, we don't." She met his eyes then, really met them, and for the first time all evening, they didn't look like adversaries. They looked like two people standing in the wreckage of something they'd both broken, and still choosing to rebuild. "You owe me an apology," she said, her voice steady. "But you also owe your daughter a family, and I think we owe ourselves a chance to try again." Tears spilled silently down Thomas's cheeks as he leaned forward and wrapped his arms around both of them, the woman he had loved for 2 decades and the daughter he had only just begun to know. "Thank you," he whispered into Nora's hair. "I love you so much. I love you both." Nora let herself melt into the embrace. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was fighting something. Not Thomas, not their past, not even herself. There was still pain, and there would be hard days ahead. Forgiveness wasn't a single act, but a long, winding road. But sitting there in the quiet glow of the living room, with Thomas's arms around her and Lily breathing softly against her side, she realized something she had forgotten long ago. Love was never about perfection. It wasn't about spotless trust or unbroken promises. It was about the choice to stay, to keep showing up, to keep trying, even when the cracks were deep and the road was steep. It was about taking the shards of what once was and, together, building something new from the pieces. She didn't know what their future would look like, but she knew this much: they were still a family. Maybe a different one than she had once imagined, maybe one forged in heartbreak and patched with forgiveness, but a family nonetheless. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. Spring melted into summer, and with it, the sharp edges of that night began to soften. Life in the Carter home did not transform overnight. There were awkward silences and difficult conversations, moments when the past hung heavy over the dinner table or surfaced in Nora's dreams. But slowly, steadily, something new began to take root. Thomas cut back on his travel, refusing long projects that would keep him away for weeks at a time. "I've spent too many years missing moments. I can't get back," he said one morning as he poured coffee, and Nora believed him. He came home earlier, helped with dinner, lingered in the kitchen to wash dishes while humming quietly to himself. The house no longer felt like a place of waiting. It felt lived in, fuller, warmer, alive. And Lily slipped into their lives with the gentle persistence of spring rain. At first, she tread carefully, always asking permission before touching anything, calling Nora ma'am, even after being told she didn't need to. But over time, the stiffness faded. Nora began to find Lily in the kitchen after school, humming while helping chop vegetables. She heard the girls' laughter echo through the halls when Thomas taught her how to make pancakes on Saturday mornings. And one afternoon, Nora realized Lily had stopped calling her ma'am altogether. They built a rhythm together, dinners around the table where conversation flowed more easily, evenings spent at the local theater, Saturday walks through the Charleston waterfront where Lily would excitedly point out every dog they passed. On Sundays, they started a new tradition, family photos. At first, Lily was shy about being in them, but soon she was the one dragging them into frame, demanding just one more shot. The first photo that truly felt like theirs was taken on a breezy June evening in front of the old oak tree in the park. Thomas stood behind them, arms wrapped around both Nora and Lily, who leaned into Nora's side, smiling wide and unguarded. When Nora looked at that picture later, she was startled by the expression on her own face, not forced, not polite, but genuinely, quietly happy. Each small moment stitched them closer together. The hurt hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined the space between them. Instead, there was laughter where there had once been silence, connection where there had been distance. Nora and Lily began sharing secrets over late-night cocoa, and Nora found herself thinking of her as our daughter long before she ever said the words out loud. One evening, a soft summer rain pattered against the windows as the three of them curled up on the living room sofa, a movie flickering on the screen. Lily had fallen asleep with her head on Nora's shoulder, and Thomas's arm was draped around them both. The world outside was quiet. Just the rain, the glow of the lamp, the steady rhythm of Lily's breathing. Nora stared at the girl's sleeping face, then at Thomas, who was watching them both with a small, contented smile. And in that moment, something deep inside her settled. They had walked through fire to get here. They had broken and bled and nearly lost everything. But they had chosen to stay, chosen to fight, chosen to build something new from the ashes of what was. "We can't change the past," she thought, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. "But we can decide how the story ends." And in her heart, she knew this story would not end with betrayal. It would not be defined by a single night of weakness or years of unspoken pain. It would be rewritten as something else entirely, a beginning, a family. As the credits rolled and the rain fell steady outside, Nora leaned her head against Thomas's shoulder and let her eyes drift closed. The past was still part of her and always would be, but it no longer held her captive. What mattered now was this: the warmth pressed against her on both sides, the home they had built together, the love that had survived the breaking. And as she drifted toward sleep, Nora understood that the most beautiful stories don't erase the scars. They grow around them.